I'm Chaz, and this is Wine is Serious Business, episode 159. We're here with Marcus Goodfellow, the owner and proprietor of Matello Wines here in McMinnville. We're at his new tasting, or the new winery, I guess, facility and tasting room. Get to taste some of his wines with him. So,
yeah, this interview's been over a year in the works, so we're really happy to finally get this together. And start out, why don't you just talk a little bit about what's driving you with your winery and the wines you make.
Nice. Good question to start with, actually.
Yeah.
So, driving force for me, to be honest, is just that I really like wine. I caught the bug, caught it hard, working in the restaurant industry, and have fallen in love with Oregon. I've said over the years that I'm not so much a winemaker as an Oregon producer, and I think that we have just a really special place. And it's not so much a matter of better or worse, it's just a matter of that there's so much to explore with the possibilities here.
Awesome, and we kind of feel that way about Oregon too. It's a lot of what we're trying to do with the show, share the awesome stuff we're doing. So we were trying to narrow it down to what to do for a show. We really couldn't. We've got 5 wines. Hopefully we'll move through them in a timely fashion, but either way, they should all be worth talking about. So what's first?
So the first one is a white wine that we make called Clover. Clover was something that sort of evolved over time. I think people think of winemakers as these wizards behind the curtain or whatever that are brilliant from the moment they start. I was not. It took me a number of years to actually get a faint clue what I was doing. But fortunately, the yeast did most of the work, and I had a nice community around me to keep me off of any of the large precipices that you can fall off of.
Okay.
So,
What was your first vintage?
first vintage was 2002. So I had the luxury of starting with a couple of other good people. John Roshaw started in 02, Rob Stewart started in 02, and so I believe in the Bodeckers.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a good vintage
Good
for
crowd.
winemakers.
Yeah, that's cool. Gee, yeah, all of these guys are still around, right? All still doing good stuff.
So this one is 100% Pinot Gris. We call it Clover because it's actually handled in an extremely different manner. We do what I would think of as a very normal Oregon Pinot Gris. It's something that's very crisp, very fresh, very dry, and we release it every May. So it follows the vintage up very quickly. It's only aged about 7 months. A lot of vibrancy. This wine is completely the opposite, and it basically comes from a very small portion of Bishop Creek Vineyard. It's barrel fermented, goes completely through malolactic, and is basically handling Pinot Gris as if it were a very high quality Chardonnay.
how much new oak?
No new oak. It's very, very neutral barrels. We're just looking for the wood fermentation characteristics. We're looking for a slightly more oxidative fermentation, and looking for the barrels are a little bit better insulation, and they also provide a little textural impact even during the first part of primary fermentation.
Awesome. Great complexity on the nose right away. I get a lot of really nice apple fruit, like a good touch of tartness, maybe suggesting some acidity on the nose, and a good sense of richness as well.
Getting I totally agree with the apples. It's more like a Honeycrisp sort of thing for me, but like we're leaning over into peaches and maybe like clementine oranges, and just a little hint of that sort of orange citrus in there too, and then orange stone fruit. So.
And you definitely see
It smells wonderful.
that,
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
that richness to it that you don't see as much of with Pinot Gris like you're talking about. Like due to that, I think if this were poured to me blind, I would maybe even guess Chardonnay.
Exactly.
So saying that it's a similar production style makes a lot of sense.
And it's interesting to me because apple always comes across as something that's like, oh, it's apple, but really good apples have a very strong memory. I think intact for most of us. So if you live in Oregon, you've been somewhere, you had that apple off the tree, or you smelled it cooking in the kitchen as you walk into the house. To me, this is definitely a little baked. It's got a little spice. It has a little bit of stretch from the other fruits, and so I think that this is something that it's a lot of fun to sort of hang out with and enjoy, not so much in sort of a patio wine, but maybe more of a fall food wine.
Thanksgiving roasted vegetables. Yeah, I can really see that.
What's your favorite apple?
I've been really good at Pink Ladies, but Gravenstein and Jonathan are what I grew up with.
Okay.
And Honeycrisp also.
I've been blown away by the Honeycrisp. I just can't stop buying it. Anytime I see organic Honeycrisp and I know they're in season, it's just like, it'll come home with 10 of them. And it cost me $25, right? Whatever. You pay whatever for as long as it's good. So.
The richness really comes through on the palate here too. It's not really heavy like you can get in some Chardonnays, but there's a little bit of like, I think even like peach skin, kind of richness, a little bit of that texture showing up on the palate, along with good like crisp, leaning towards green apple fruit. I think I like the Honey Crisp, or I'm a big fan of Braeburn apple, so I see that a lot, showing a little bit of tartness, but a little bit of red apple character as well. And the spices that you were talking about definitely show too. And I see that in Pinot Grigio. I think sometimes that expresses itself as a lot more like heavy or uncomfortable bitterness, and here it's a really nice complement to the richness and the fruit flavors.
I think the barrel aging imparts a really subtle texture, and I think that you almost need the slight bitterness that is very natural to Pinot Grigio to sort of counterbalance that. It stretches the wine to me, it moves it. Like, I love the way that this comes into your mouth, and the play, the feeling, the texture is very weightless, but at the same time very rich. And then as it plays down the palate, for me, I'm really happy that Grigio has that natural bitterness, because I think that it kind of changes the wine at the end and then gives you almost like a second weight.
It sits really nicely on the palate too. I really like that when there's no finished mouth waters a little bit.
The textural side of this is much better than like a normal steel fermented Pinot Gris, right? Like, it's got a roundness and a little more weight to it on the palate, even though it's a pretty low alcohol wine, right? So, yeah, and then the apple play on the finish, like totally getting like a Granny Smith thing, as the acidity just sort of like lingers for a long time on the finish, and this does hang in the mouth for a while.
What's the price on this?
24?
Nice.
$24.
Yeah.
For a barrel aged white,
Right.
good deal. Yeah.
Cool complexity, a good and somewhat unique expression of Pinot Gris. Like, you don't see a lot of wines like this, I don't think, from Oregon. And I really like the expression that it's bringing. It's something that you can think about a bit too, which is definitely not something I think you get too frequently with Pinot Gris.
Yeah, totally.
I think that we were really aiming for something that, you know, when you look at price point, we're a little more expensive than the average Pinot Gris. And then where you're talking about sort of the fresh, bright, you know, early release Pinot Gris, it's meant to be a cocktail wine. And this is something that's handled in a much more hands-on manner, that it's, you know, barrel fermented, definitely much longer fermentation. Primary fermentation here finished in June, so this was 9 months going dry, which is an amazing amount of time.
That's
And then following it, you know, through malolactic, it bottles on 15 months, and so you have a wine that's definitely. The reason we call it clover is because clover is something you find. It's not something that we set out to create. It was something sort of that was just that happened, and that's
right.
That to me is the nature of this wine is something that you come into, and so that it seemed very fitting. But it also is something that is not the usual.
totally. And I'm finding that I've had a very small amount of these where people are putting more effort into Pinot Gris. Because I know when I first started drinking Oregon wines, and Pinot Gris was kind of, it's the cocktail wine, right? Like, tends to be a lower price point, tends to be not, maybe a more amount of effort into it, but not, the end product was never that great, right? And then now we're starting to experience people putting more effort into these, oak aging them, perhaps doing some on the skin contact, whatever. But we're getting more complexity out of Pinot Gris, it's worth checking out, and this is totally worth it.
Yeah, it's another one that's making me come around. I generally don't
Really
like
interesting,
it, but,
really delicious, yeah.
it's another data point that's like, you know, you should try more.
Spend more time with the people that put some effort into Pinot Gris, so.
On to wine number 2.
If we don't make it a serious wine, pretty soon people will drink Torontes instead of Pinot Gris. And
Yeah.
that's just the reality of it. So I think at some point, and also, you know, California's planning it, so Oregon, at some point, you have to really step up and make a point of it. It grows specifically here in a way that can be handled to produce not just something that you pick up for the afternoon, but something that really is special and unique to Oregon.
That's the point.
I just had a fruit fly that was trying to suck down my red smooth.
So a really cool lineup here. We're getting to taste pretty much every vintage for red wines here, but one of the Syrahs, but yeah, 2007, 2008, and 2010 Pinots, killer. So.
This is a cool comparison we get to do, like, in the moment on the show here, right? The 2007 Whistling Ridge Pinot Noir, and next we're going to do the 2010 Whistling Ridge, which is fun. And you know, Chaz and I have been tasting Marcus's wines for a number of years. I just looked back in 2009. I had posted a tasting note on this, so it's really great to come back and check in with. Is there, anything you'd like to share about this before we move it?
I think in terms of 2007 to me is sort of a miracle vintage. It's a vintage that people trashed before we harvested grapes. And literally, there was disastrous news coming out of the critics. It's what taught me that for the most part, some critics, their role is really to be first rather than to be right.
I've been seeing so much of that myself. Yeah, that's been a new discovery to me. We're doing it wrong.
You just got to quicker to punch.
Yeah.
But realistically, the 07 vintage for me, this wine in particular, when it was first released, I would be the first person to say that it wasn't what I thought would be a very pretty, very delicate, very honest, and also very delicious Pinot Noir. It was something that it was a very tough and challenging vintage, but one that I think was maybe wrongly handled in terms of the way that the media brought it out. But it was something that where if you worked hard and if you were really meticulous in what you were doing, that the wines had potential, and I'm continually amazed at how well the 07 vintage is living up to a potential that most of us, even in the industry, didn't see. They're so much better than I think that we would have thought at the time.
I totally agree. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand when you opened this up, we pre-tasted it. Some 07s that I got on release, kind of worried about, stuck in the back, forgot about them, and man, they're just coming alive. So, I think this is an example of that. Although, I'd have to look at, if Dan tasted this, I probably tasted it.
But I know, looking at the note, I know the context, you weren't there.
Okay, so there you go. But, smells absolutely wonderful right now.
Pinot Noir is a supremely contrary grape. Only thing I can think of that really is close is Nebbiolo as well. But it actually puts on weight. It becomes more muscular in bottle. If you almost have to be careful that if you're going to bottle with something that has this really good density to it, that a couple of years down the road it may be more than you want. I mean,
right.
It really does flesh out. 2005 was very wiry and lean when it was first released, and those wines are muscular and compact.
I remember them. Yeah, so much to them now.
So much acidity in the beginning. And 7 is one of those things that you have this very light, wispy, elegant wines, but they've filled out amazingly.
They really have. Yeah. Some have, some fall apart. Depends on when it was, whatever, producer when it was picked or whatever. But yeah, the more 07s have turned out really good, like 90% than ones that haven't.
So we checked into all of these, kind of like usual, to figure out what we're going to do with the show, make sure nothing's corked. And this has opened up even more since that original taste. Like there's a lot of depth on the nose already. Like really good dark cherries, like still pure cherries. It's not like heavy syrupy fruit, but just a touch of darkness and some really good depth.
A little like the pie cherry thing going on there, right? Like almost some of the baking spice and a little bit of the pie itself is there, right? Like a cherry pie that's been cooked and then allowed to cool after everyone's had dinner and gone through the dessert. And you've got that right, just stick it in the fridge. It's like sort of that aroma, and it's just spicy and easy to speak. It smells fantastic, easy to smell, but yes, it smells delicious.
There's a couple of things that we do that are not unique at Matello, but they're definitely what sort of separate you into different schools of winemaking. One is the whole cluster. When we're fermenting the wines, we're adding the stems into the wines. And so this is something that generally sees 30 to 50% whole cluster. And that pie spice that wraps around the red cherry fruit is, to me, something that comes from the stems, which is always a little bit odd to think that cinnamon and nutmeg come from either brown or green stems. But that is really one of the aromatic contributions. And then the other thing that I love of this vineyard in particular, really learning Pinot Noir from the stands of France, Burgundy, and then some Oregon. The beautiful nature of a place that has both the red fruit and the darkness. And the darkness is a note, but that's so consistent with Ribbon Ridge to me, and so consistent with, I think, this vineyard, certainly Beaufrere. That's one of the things that I appreciate about their wines. They have, it's the iron glove and the velvet fist. That's not really right. Obviously, we tasted these wines early.
Yes.
Let's say that it's the velvet glove and the iron fist.
Yes. I know where you're going there. So, yes.
But that interplay between sort of really nice red fruit and then a little hint of darkness. I don't
I do like
Pinot
that.
Noir that gets too dark.
Is it, so Whistling Ridge is Dundee Hills, right?
Ribbon Ridge.
It's Ribbon Ridge, okay. All right, so. Sometimes you can get that out of Dundee Hills too. A little bit of darkness, but then that really bright red fruit too, so.
I totally agree. Our current 2010 Durant is like that. I think the Ribbon Ridge is a little AVA that makes you wait too. You know, it's one of those places that just, you know, I think Dundee Hills is, you see the wines earlier for what they are. So Ribbon Ridge comes out and there's structure and tan, and sometimes they're lighter, and again, it's that thing of like, they put on weight like nobody's business. So.
That's good to know. I haven't had as much experience with Ribbon Ridge.
So this wine is smoking right now. It's
Yeah.
balance-wise, I think you were talking about on release that this was a beast, right? Tannically, acidically, like it was
Unpleasant.
okay.
Split it out, it was unpleasant.
From the winemaker, but now it's just in a very good place, right? The acidity and tannin are dialed right in with the intensity of the fruit, and just providing a very good experience. Like very linear, very easy to understand, delicious. So.
Really nice cherries, and I really like how there's like a rising note of raspberries across the mid palate, kind of giving that this like bright acidic character. A little bit of limes later, but I really like that evolution of fruit. And the tannins have really come to a nice place. Like they still have kind of a firm touch to them, but it's not rough at all. It's very refined, and just adds, you know, it's like this nice firm frame for these like brighter fruits and fruits with good depth to hang off of.
I'm really happy. I love the fact that it is still tannic, but not in an aggressive way. I think that, you know, the sweet fruit is a wonderful thing, but you have to have things that sort of keep that from being the last thing in your mouth, the last flavor in your mouth.
Cuts a little bit or
Yeah,
balance it out.
either acid or tannin, but something that, and so that way you don't, coming back to it, you're not, you know, it's not cloying, it's not boring.
No, it's definitely not that.
Something that's been in my mind a little more lately too is like with stone fruits, like the pit. Like there's a little flavor that reminds me of the pit in a cherry too.
And this would be a wine I'd be excited to have with dinner. Like, I think the levels of intensity here across the board, as far as the structure, the alcohol, and the fruit, would play well to a wine like food. And I know that people like you, sometimes like, it doesn't drink great on its own. Drink it with, you know, drink it with a dinner, like, or drink it with food. This is not the case. You could totally drink this watching, you know, a movie or whatever. But I think that food would really complement this wine. Very complimentary. So awesome. Or the wine would complement the food.
Yeah.
Yes. So said that backwards. But yeah, delicious. And right in line with other 07s that we've had, right? 07 is a vintage worth checking on. And oddly enough, you can still buy it.
Yeah. Thanks, bad press. I don't know. You did everybody in Oregon a huge favor by hating on 07.
Totally. Yeah.
I agree. In the long run, it wasn't real pleasant at the time.
Yeah.
No.
You know, but
Sorry, you did consumers in Oregon a huge favor.
and I think the industry, because I think people have gotten it. You know, as a whole, I think there's so many more people out there now that since the 07s have lingered long enough for people to see how they've evolved, that people are starting to realize that, you know, a great vintage is great in the cellar, but, you know, you can see something that's a little bit ugly. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad wine. So anyway, people, it seems like they've had time to find that the 07's the way that they evolve. And I think that's a huge boon to those of us in the industry, especially who have a European style.
Totally.
And a good data point to everybody who's drinking, because I think the information is getting out there now that 07 is worth your time. Same vineyard, 3 years later. This is the 2010.
That's changed.
Kind of asked if we could do this because I was out here over Thanksgiving weekend. This is one of the wines that I picked up. If we didn't do it tonight, I was going to do it on a show later, but now I get to drink it myself some other time, which is great. And we still get to share the wine with you. So, any remarks about this vineyard in 2010?
One of my very favorite vineyards. And on a whole, every vintage. The fruit from here, on its own, can often be very linear and very, you know, structured in the beginning, but it's a fantastic blending component. It's a great white wine vineyard. And in 2010, I like to think of that vintage as sort of the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's not, it's the, this is just right vintage. Everything kind of came into play, vintage and very transparent. And so all of the things that you would like about a vineyard really show up well, and it minimizes any of the negatives.
Awesome.
Yeah. Has changed.
That is
So much more aromatic. Right?
so much more aromatic, yes.
Well, that's cool. And when I tasted over Thanksgiving weekend, I was here, right after opening, so it was kind of like a pop and pour right then too. So it's interesting to see like there's more depth. What I liked about it right away is there's like another like really bright kind of like floral fruity component that's really friendly and kind of engaging right away. After being open, man, an hour tops. It's probably more like 30, 40 minutes or something like that. A lot more depth is coming to the nose.
Totally.
Beautiful cellar tracker note on this, where a guy said basically that they opened it and that he put it in the fridge each night, and on day 4, it suddenly, at like the last half glass, unfolded into the wine that he thought it might be, or that it was supple and delicious, as we put it, which is perfect. And whoever that is, thank you for waiting 4 days. So,
We'll look them up. Let's see, Ron Feltoven wrote a really nice note on the 2010 Sorry
yeah.
recently that I was like, liked it. I actually sent him a message, I commented, and I'm like, that was great. So, yeah.
Ron is definitely, he's on the Matello bus, which is fantastic, and he's got a great palate.
He does.
I really enjoy his take on wines. He's a very thoughtful person in terms of his commentary.
Cool. Yeah, we always enjoy exchanges with him. Thanks for watching.
Someday we can drink wine with you. I look forward to it. But man, this wine.
Nice spicy notes.
Just the fruit on this. It's like almost hard at least for me to describe. It's like, you'll easily dial to cherries, but there's more going on here than just that, right? Like, there's like the red apple thing, there is some strawberry components, or maybe like a balsamic strawberry thing. There's like, because of the richness that's imparted
I can see that.
through that. Like, I wanted to like go back to the figure mentioned on another wine, but like there's just a
Stage strawberry instead of the fig. It has that hint of the balsamic strawberry. It's perfect.
Yeah,
and I love this vineyard for that. It's not just fruit; it's complexity, and you get to. I love in wine to go fishing for what's going on.
Right.
And to me, there's a little bit of almost Italian kitchen herb in there as well.
I would agree. Basically, like just like a dried green herbal component, just a hint of it out of it. Man, yeah, serious complexity on those. So.
And a little bit maybe of the orange peel.
See, that ties into a great thing that we were talking about earlier too. He said that through his bartending career, like there was an evolution into appreciation of bitter ones and mixing them and what they can contribute to the beverage. And yeah, like one of the classic bitter liqueurs, right, is Campari, which is that's orange peel flavors.
Absolutely. And I think that, almost everyone starts with whites that have a little bit of sweetness to them, and then you go into sort of bigger reds. Once you have bigger reds down, then you kind of, I think, either sit there and stay, or you start fishing around. And what I found is that I still drink big reds, but more and more and more, I also love these sort of elegant, lighter wines, but definitely things that have bitter components, all the things that when I was a kid and my grandparents would, have a scotch, that I would be like, that's terrible. And now I'm sort of like, oh yeah, I like that. So,
Right. Happens. It's funny how tastes develop over time. So.
we have a very rustic style. I'm really happy with it. I think it goes very well with food, but I think it does incorporate sort of, it's very open in terms of like, we're really trying to just let the vineyard do the talking. I want to frame it as well as we can. I think that's my job. But at the same time, the idea is just to see a little bit of the quirks and eccentricities that come with the place that the fruit's actually grown. And to do that, you can't take out the things that are not perfect. You have to leave them in and just kind of wait it out or deal with it. And that's what creates the individuality, which to me is what Pinot Noir is really about.
Which I'm learning. Early on, I was like, no, I want the big fruit all the time, and that's all I'm caring about. And now it's every vintage is different. And so I even bought 09s, knowing that I wasn't so much into that big fruit anymore, but I know that it's going to be like, I have some more 9s, and I'm going to get to check in on that vintage, because they are different, and every one can be beautiful in that expression, right? Like sometimes when you want a bigger one. So this wine in particular has changed dramatically, and something I've experienced with Matello's wines, or your wines multiple times, is that yes, they need to breathe. Dennis is a prime example of that. This has changed even on the palate, because one other thing that has struck me with some of the Pinots is that the acidity levels for me I'm very into high intensity or highest. Wow, I can't talk. This happens. More acidic wines can come across harsh to me, and so sometimes the Pinots and Matello's Pinots do that. And when we first tasted this, maybe the intensity of the fruit was not there, it was not in line with the acidity. Now it's more integrated. It's right there. Like, I'm not feeling that acidity anymore. Or there's just fruit there with it, so it's a completely different package than it was before. And it's actually a remarkable change from when we first tasted this. There's completely different.
Just great evolution of complexity, I think, on here too. Like, definitely, if you buy a bottle of this and want to drink it soon, like, I'd say dump it in the decanter, let it sit for an hour, but pour yourself that much to taste first, just so you can experience this change. It's really interesting, and I'm getting such incredible fruit flavors right now sitting on the center of the palate. They're not like heavy and rich; they're just really pure and complex. I think, you know, you say raspberries, just like he was talking about with apples. Like, it's a descriptor that you can kind of throw out pretty easily. But I think, like, when you have the raspberries where you eat them, you're like, yes, like, these are great. There's that bright sense of fruit that just sits in the center of the palate. All the structural elements work around on the borders. Is what I'm really getting, and I'm just kind of like reveling in these fruit flavors. And the structure is definitely a touch big right now, and to me it speaks, you know, more towards the future, and definitely speaks to, like, please decant it, because you don't want to lose the fruit in that structure. But it's not too much, and I think if you watch this regularly, you know I am pretty sensitive to, like, it's easy for tannins to go too far with me, and it doesn't get there. It's just like a firm outline and this brilliant fruit sitting in the center. And while I really like it now, I'm really excited to see what this is going to taste like in like 5 years.
And that's, I think Ribbon Ridge is an AVA in Oregon. I love all the different AVAs for the diversity, but I think that the nature of that one is that if there's one that you have to put in the cellar, it's Ribbon Ridge. The food will do things that I don't necessarily always find. I certainly would say that I have great over wines from all the different AVAs, but I love the way that Ribbon Ridge evolves. I'd also say that in terms of Matello wines being a little bit tannic or a little too structured, that I like to think of our wines as being a little bit like Oregon weather. If you don't like it, wait 20 minutes, it'll be different.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point.
Or in this case, give it 3 years.
Right,
It'll
exactly.
be different.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the case of this, right, like, so this is the 07 was more obese than the 10 on release, right? And look what it's turned into in 3 years. So yes,
The 07 is
Brilliant.
so drinkable right now, and the 10s showcase what the potential is right now, but what they will be in 3 or 4 years is mind-blowing.
exciting.
It's going to be good.
It's very exciting.
And what's the
Yes.
price on this right now?
It's 31.
Yeah, which, you know, for wine that's enjoyable right now, a lot of aging potential, it's a great price. And I think, you know, Mark's has definitely been one who's been at it for 10 years now, and has still really held the line on really approachable pricing for Oregon Pinot Noir.
which we always appreciate. Yeah.
It's 75 cases. It's a very, very narrow selection. We're picking the very best barrels from the vineyard. And some of it, to be fair, the Syrah is also a significant percentage of that vineyard, but we always want to make sure that if you're buying the single vineyard